Have you ever just felt completely exhausted by the constant pressure to be your best self? Well, today we are going to dive into a pretty radical idea. What if that whole obsession with the self is the very thing that's holding us back? We're going to look at the science, we're going to look at the history, and we're going to ask, is it time for a major system upgrade?
I mean, you see this message everywhere, right? From self-help books to your social media feed, it's hammered into us. Your entire life's mission is to find, polish, and then show off your true self. It's sold to us as the ultimate prize, the real key to a happy and fulfilled life.
But here is where things get really wild. When neuroscientists actually look inside our brains, searching for this self, this little person at the controls, they find nothing. It's not there. And that fascinating, mind-bending paradox is exactly what we're going to unravel today.
Okay, so if the self isn't a thing sitting in our brains, then what is it? Let's start our little investigation with a quick tour of your own neural command center and see if we can find this ghost in the machine.
For decades, scientists just assumed that somewhere in your brain, there had to be a master controller, right? A little CEO in a corner office pulling all the strings. But after years and years of searching, the verdict is in. The CEO's office is empty. There is no single central self module in your brain. So if there's no CEO, what is creating this feeling of me that we all have? Well, it seems to be a brilliant illusion, basically woven together from at least 3 different systems. First, you've got the embodied self. That's the basic feeling that, yep, this arm belongs to me. Then there's the narrative self. That's the storyteller in your head, constantly spinning a yarn about your past and your future. And finally, you have the experiential self, which is just your raw, unfiltered awareness of what's happening right now. Your brain is like a master weaver, just seamlessly stitching these 3 threads together into the thing you call you.
And this leads to this incredible idea called the post hoc model. What it suggests is that your conscious self isn't actually the one making decisions. Nope. It's more like a press secretary. So deep in the government of your brain, all these different departments make a decision. Then the self runs up to the podium and confidently announces, "I have decided to get a coffee." The self doesn't make the choice, it just explains it after the fact. Wild, right?
Now, this might sound like some brand new, cutting-edge discovery, but what's truly mind-blowing is that this idea is ancient. Just look at this chart. For thousands of years, Zen philosophy has talked about no self, or anatta, and the parallels to what modern neuroscience is finding are just uncanny. What Zen calls delusion, neuroscience now calls over-identification with the brain's narrative. It's the exact same insight, just reached from 2 totally different directions.
So this brings up a huge question. If the self is just a construct of the brain, where did our modern obsession with it even come from? I mean, think about it. Your great-great-grandparents definitely weren't stressed about finding themselves. To answer that, we've got to switch gears from neuroscience to history.
And here's the key insight. Our modern idea of a unique individual self, it isn't some timeless truth we just discovered. It was a tool. Think of it like a new mental operating system that we had to invent to cope with the insane challenges of the industrial age.
I mean, just try to picture that massive shift. You're ripped from your small, tight-knit village and thrown into a huge, anonymous city. The old safety nets of family and community, they're gone. In that chaotic, hyper-competitive new world, you suddenly needed a strong story of who I am, just to function, to make choices, to be seen as a reliable person. The self became a critical survival tool. And that tool was incredibly effective for its time. But what happens when the world changes and we forget it was just a tool? What happens when the tool itself becomes the ultimate goal of our lives? Well, that's when it starts to get toxic. And that's pretty much where we are today.
This slide just lays out that toxic evolution perfectly. It started as a practical tool. This idea of me helps me survive. Then it turned into an abstract goal. I must discover my one true self. And now, in the age of social media, it's become a product, a personal brand that we have to perform and curate 24/7. It turns our own lives into a relentless, exhausting performance.
This quote from the source material just nails it. It's the perfect analogy for our situation. We are trying to navigate the super complex, high-speed highway of the 21st century with a mental operating system designed for a bumpy dirt road. It isn't just inefficient, it's causing a total systemic disaster of anxiety, burnout, and division.
Okay, so if our current mental OS is obsolete, what's the upgrade? This brings us to a really cool and practical solution, the functional no-self. And let's be super clear. This isn't about some mystical escape from reality. It's about a necessary software update for the modern mind. So what does this actually mean in real life? Well, functional no-self is a state where you still have your unique personality, you still have your job, your relationships, all of that. The huge difference is in how you relate to yourself. You start to see it as a useful tool you can pick up when you need it, like a hammer, instead of this fragile core identity that you have to protect and defend 24/7.
Now, it's really important to get what this is not. This is not about becoming some bland, personality-less robot. It's not about suppressing your emotions. It is about observing your emotions without getting totally swept away by them. It's about loosening your death grip on the story of me, not about erasing your past. So think of it as a practical mental tool, not some far-out mystical state.
This one sentence just captures the feeling of it so perfectly. I exist, but I don't have to constantly prove I exist. Can you just imagine the incredible amount of mental and emotional energy that frees up? When you can finally get off that treadmill of constantly trying to validate yourself.
Now, this sounds pretty liberating for us as individuals, right? But a mental shift this massive can't just happen in a bubble. For functional no-self to become a real option for everybody, it takes more than just individual effort. It actually requires a fundamental redesign of our society. It's a full-on civilizational design project.
And the absolute bedrock of this whole shift is safety. A no-self mindset just can't take root when people are stuck in a desperate day-to-day struggle to survive. As you can see here, the first non-negotiable step is building a society where people's basic needs are met and they feel fundamentally secure. Only when you lower that baseline survival anxiety can our rigid defensive selves start to relax and become more flexible.
So on top of that safety net, the source material points to 3 other critical pillars. First, that institutionalized safety we just talked about. Second, we need a shift to non-self-based contribution, where your value comes from the work you do, not from whether your job is your one true passion. And third, cultural legitimacy. This means society itself has to give us permission to just be, without the constant pressure to perform and express our so-called unique self.
So, when you put all of these pieces together, the neuroscience, the history, the societal redesign, what are we really looking at? Well, we could be looking at the very first tremors of a major civilizational upgrade, a fundamental transition from one way of being human to the next.
Now, this isn't science fiction, but it's also not going to happen overnight. This timeline lays out one possible path over the next 50 to 100 years. It suggests that in the next decade, our current anxieties might get even worse, which could be the catalyst for real change. That could lead to the first real-world experiments in building de-selfed communities in the 2040s and 50s. And if those actually work, this new mental model could become the default way of being in some parts of the world by the end of the century.
And that really brings us to the final, thought-provoking question at the very heart of this whole idea. It suggests this isn't about reaching some spiritual enlightenment, but about reaching a new level of civilizational maturity. When our actual survival no longer depends on the story of me, only then can we finally earn the right to ask ourselves, do I really need this much me? It's a question that might just define the future of what it means to be human.